Let's now see how the long-run market supply curve is derived. So here we have a typical firm, and in the long run that typical firm is earning zero economic profit, so price is set equal to the average cost curve. And notice that that does happen at the minimum of the average cost curve, where the marginal cost curve and the average cost curves intersect. The long-run market supply curve is going to be horizontal at that market price, or it's going to be horizontal at that price which is equal to the minimum average cost curve. Now, why is that long-run supply curve going to be horizontal? The long-run market supply curve is horizontal if the following conditions hold. One, we're assuming that all firms have identical costs. So they all have a similar average cost curve, similar marginal cost curve, and they do not differ from each other. We're also assuming that as firms enter or exit the market, they do not affect the underlying market costs. That's a pretty strong assumption. As you can imagine, as more and more firms enter into a market, that can put pressure on input prices. And so you would think that as more and more firms enter into the market, as input prices rise, average costs will rise, marginal cost of production will rise, and so on. We're going to assume that that does not hold. So if the long-run market supply curve is horizontal, we're going to refer to this as a constant cost industry. This is an industry that as the market expands, costs remain constant. Now what we have to realize is that if either of the conditions given above in numbers 1 and 2 are violated, then the long-run supply curve is not horizontal. And we'll discuss that later. But first, let's consider the short-run and long-run effects of an increase in demand and why that will lead to a horizontal long-run supply curve. So let's assume that we're currently in a long-run equilibrium. So we're holding the conditions that all firms have identical costs, and on the left-hand side here, we see a firm that represents the typical firm in this industry. We're currently in a long-run equilibrium because at P1, the price is equal to average cost. If there is an increase in demand, so suppose there's an increase in the number of consumers, or this is a normal good and incomes rise. If there's an increase in demand, then we know that the market price is going to rise. As the market price rises, the typical firm in this market is going to earn economic profit. They'll take that new price of P2 is given, and they will have an incentive to produce more output at that higher equilibrium price. Notice that what we have done is we've moved from point A to point B along the short-run supply curve. We have yet to allow entry into the market, but we know it's coming, right? If firms are earning economic profit, over time those profits induce entry, and that's going to shift the short-run market supply curve to the right, and that's going to reduce the market price from P2 back to the original price of P1. And notice that if you compare points A to C, you're comparing two long-run equilibrium points. And these 2 points are what map out the long-run supply curve. Now, why might the long-run supply curve slope upward? The long-run supply curve slopes upward if firms have different costs. So not all firms have the same cost structure, and or costs increase as other firms enter or exit the market. So this is the situation where as more firms enter into the market, it puts pressure on input prices, and as those input prices rise, then you're going to see that the only way to get the firms to produce more output is if prices increase enough in the long run to cover the increasing marginal cost of production. If the long-run market supply curve is upward sloping, then we refer to this industry as an increasing cost industry. Let's consider this example. So here we're going to focus on the fact that we have 2 firms. Both of these firms are in the oil industry, and firm 1, oil is near the surface for them, so it's not as costly for them to drill the oil as it would be for firm 2, where oil is located a little deeper. And notice the cost structure. Firm 2's costs are higher at a given quantity of output relative to firm 1 because it is relatively more expensive for them to drill oil. So let's see how this affects the long-run supply curve in the oil industry. Let's consider a price of $17. I've chosen that price because the price is just equal to the minimum average cost of our low-cost firm, Firm 1. If the price is anything less than $17, the firm would not earn any economic profit, and we know that in the long run, they would choose to exit the industry. So quantity in this market would be 0. If the market price is exactly $17, then Firm 1 will choose to produce 4 units. Firm 2 will not produce anything because at $17 they would be incurring an economic loss. And we see that as a whole for this market, you sum the production of Firm 1 with Firm 2 at a price of $17, the industry output will be $4. If we consider a higher price like $29, at $29, Firm 1 will choose to produce 6 units. Firm 2 will choose to produce 5 units. And so at $29, the total industry output is 11. Notice what happened here. At $17, Firm 2 did not have an incentive to produce. The only way they would have an incentive to produce is if the market price went up enough to cover their increasing marginal cost of production. At a price of $50 in this market, Firm 1 will choose to produce 8 units. Firm 2 will choose to produce 7 units, and the industry as a whole will choose to produce 15. If we map out those points, we see that the long-run industry supply curve is actually upward sloping. Now, we went through this example assuming that Firm 1 and Firm 2 had different cost structures. But you easily could say Firm 1 is the typical firm in this industry, and that graph for Firm 2 would show what happens to industry costs as more firms enter into the industry. So that graph for Firm 2 would show that as more firms enter into the industry and industry costs rise because of pressures on input prices, then the only way you can get the industry to expand output is by having higher market prices. And then finally, there is a special case, and in this special case, you're talking about a decreasing cost industry. This can happen when industries cluster together, and that can create decreasing costs. Basically, what happens as one industry grows, suppliers of inputs move closer to that industry. They come to the industry, the suppliers do, and that helps reduce the costs of production. Some great examples of this include Dalton, Georgia, which was one time known as the carpet capital of the world. Silicon Valley, which is known for its computer technology. Hollywood, which is known for its movies. And now Smeer, Holland, which is known for its flower markets. What we find, though, is that these clustering, or what are sometimes known as agglomeration effects, are temporary. So what we see is that as the industry is expanding in the long run, you will see that the firms are willing to provide more output at lower prices, but eventually these decreasing costs, they become all realized, and the only way the industry will continue to expand after a certain point of time is if the market price rises.